Welcome to the YouTube channel. My name is Dean Tenney, and I'm coming to you from my studio here in fabulous Las Vegas. Today's lecture is Ginnie Maes and Collateralized Mortgage Obligations on the Series 7, and it's appropriate for SIE. A couple questions can be found on the SIE in this category in 65. I'll put it in the playlist for both, and it's a little, perhaps more than you need, but that's always better than too little. Abundance is better than scarcity. This is a requested lecture. Andrew requested this. We honor lecture requests. When I first started the channel, I tried to put up some lectures that I thought could be as helpful in the various subject areas. And I chose not to do short little lectures, 5, 10, 15 minutes, but full narrative lectures on complete subject areas. And as it was very clear that those are supplemental. They're not, if you watch all the videos, may you pass, I wouldn't feel good telling you that. But I consider these requests to kind of plug the gap a little bit on things perhaps I didn't choose to put in the lecture. We've had about 5 or 6 of these requests that we've honored. Some have been very popular, types of customer accounts, for example, test-taking tricks, for example, taxation, for example. Those were all requested lectures. So if you have a lecture request, just make sure you make it known, and then I'll tell you what the publishing schedule will look like for that. In this case, I told Andrew we'll publish this, premiere it this next week. So making it now, today is, what are we in April, late April. So sometime late April, into this month, it'll be published. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is government-sponsored enterprises. These are enterprises organized by Congress to promote home ownership. And we're going to talk about how they accomplish their mission. We're talking about the Government National Mortgage Association, colloquially known as Ginnie Mae. We'll talk about the Federal National Mortgage Association, known as Fannie Mae. We'll talk about the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, known as Freddie Mac. And then at the tail end of the lecture, we'll talk about CMOs. All right, so here's the Bank of Dean. It would be a sad day if you came into my bank and wanted to borrow money to buy a house. And I responded by saying, the problem is I've made so many home loans that I'm out of money. And so the answer is no, not because you're not good credit risk, you are. The answer is no, because I'm out of money. That would be a sad day. So, what we want to be able to do is help banks reliquify themselves so they can go make more loans. So what I'm going to do is package up my loan portfolio, and I'm going to ship it off to one of these government-sponsored enterprises. I'm going to sell it to them. They'll sprinkle a little government holy water, and now investors are much more likely or willing to buy a proportion ownership in a pool of mortgages that comes from one of these government-sponsored enterprises. Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae, Freddie Mac, whatever the case may be. True of Bank of Umpqua, fine bank, right? But again, it would be hard for them to package up their loan portfolio and sell proportion ownership in it. Frost Bank in Texas, Bank of Modesto, California. Large money center banks like JP Morgan, less of a problem to package up their loan portfolio and sell proportionate interest in it, securitize it, so they can go make more loans. But for smaller banks, it might be a little more difficult to do so. All right, so we're going to ship this mortgage off to Ginnie Mae. And so as these people make their loans, pay their loans, they're paying their loans principal and interest. That will be passed through, to the people on proportion ownership. Andrew is the person who requested this lecture. So let's say that Andrew and I both here's Andrew. Here's Dean. Let me get a different color for that. If we both put 25 grand into the same mortgage pool, our checks would look exactly alike. Our checks would look exactly alike. His check would look the same as my check. In a regular mortgage pool, the way we say that in finance is that there is no priority provisions. Everybody is treated equally. Kind of boring that everybody is treated equally. That's not important right now, but that will be important later on. No priority provisions. All investors treated equally. And these have the full faith and credit of the United States government. Very testable to know what things have the full faith and credit of the United States government, because there's two risks when you buy debt-denominated securities. They are credit risk and interest rate risk. And anytime you have government guaranteed safety, whenever you have the government guaranteeing it, you no longer have credit risk. So the only thing you have is this interest rate risk. And we'll talk about that at length in just a little bit. All right, so let's talk about Ginnie Mae. Let's talk about Ginnie Mae. We said very testable to know. When I put TQ, that doesn't mean that you're going to verbatim get a test question the way Dean phrases it. It just means you can expect a test question around that piece of information. So TQ means test question, test fodder, so to speak. And I would definitely know that the Ginnie Maes have the full faith and credit of the United States government. I would definitely know they're fully taxable. Now, we love to test you on how things are different. And by way of reminder, Treasury notes and Treasury bonds and Treasury bills are taxed at the federal level, but they're not taxed at the state level. Not true here. Ginnie Maes are fully taxable. Ginnie Maes are the only investment we have that pays interest and principal monthly. Interest and principal monthly. Most debt-denominated securities we've discussed or that are found on your exams start by giving you a return on your principal. If I lend forward $100,000, 8%, I get 8% a return on my loan. And at the end, I get a return of my loan. I get my principal, assuming they don't default, and my last interest check. Not true here. In a Ginnie Mae, they're paying interest and principal monthly. It makes sense, by the way, because that's how people pay their mortgages, right? And that mortgage gets passed through. That means very important. They're a self-liquidating investment. So if I sell 25 grand to Andrew as proportion ownership in a mortgage pool, I say, Andrew, you're getting your interest and principal monthly. And so if you plan on having anything at the end, you better take that check that represents interest perhaps and put it in a mutual fund, because this is a self-liquidating investment. When should he understand that? Before or after it self-liquidates? Before. God forbid Andrew calls me and says, hey, Dean, I didn't get a check this month. I guess my Ginnie Mae pool has matured. When can I expect my 25 grand? That return of the 25 grand I originally put in there. I said, oh, Andrew, major misunderstanding. That's been coming to you each and every month. He says, Dean, when does this thing end? I said, well, it doesn't have a stated maturity. We don't really know when this thing ends, because I don't know what's going to happen with the mortgage. We have an average life of the mortgages in there, but it's not like we have a coupon or a nominal yield or a fixed or stated rate of return. Very rarely, Andrew, do people hold their mortgages for 30 years. People move, when they move, they sell the house, they pay off the mortgage, people refinance. And so I don't know. I do know this. If interest rates go down, more people refinance and this thing will end sooner rather than later. And I do know this, if interest rates go up, people are less likely to finance and this thing will extend in its life. So this thing can have a maturity that collapses and is sooner rather than later, or later rather than sooner. By the way, that means he has interest rate risk in both directions. I say, Andrew, you're not going to be happy if interest rates go down and everybody refinances and your capital comes back to you rather quickly, because you're going to have reinvestment risk. You're going to have to put this money back out and you're not going to be able to get the same rate of return. And he says, I say, if interest rates go up, you're going to be unhappy because you're going to have your money tied into a lower than today's return, right? You're not going to be happy, if you're collecting 6 on mortgage and mortgage pay 8 or 9. Well, he said, well, gee, this sounds pretty terrible, Dean. I mean, so far, it sounds like I got credit quality of the United States government. That sounds cool. But I said, well, this is probably suitable for somebody who needs an orderly liquidation of their principal and expects a stable interest rate environment. As we said in a regular Ginnie Mae, there are no priority provisions. All the investors in the pool are treated equally. And given they invested the same amount, they put different amounts, but they'd have the same amount. The checks would look exactly the same. There are no priority provisions. Everybody's treated equally. Not important now, but it will be important later. All government securities, when Congress passed 33 and said if you're going to sell brand new securities to the public, you need to make a registration statement. You need to give people a prospectus so they can make an informed decision. But Congress said, but except your own government wouldn't rip you off. And so the U.S. government exempted themselves and their agencies. So the U.S. government and its agencies, government-sponsored enterprises, are allowed to issue securities to the public without making a registration statement. Now, if you're an exempt issuer, as government-sponsored enterprises are, that means you can only give birth or issue an exempt security. Not only are they exempt from 33 government agencies, but they are also exempt from the Uniform Securities Act. You don't have to register it with the state administrator. All government securities, all debt securities, trade over the counter in a negotiated, quote-driven market. So if I work the Ginnie Mae desk, that means I buy Ginnie Mae's into the inventory, and I sell them out of inventory. Markups or markdowns. There isn't an exchange. So all debt-denominated securities, including agency securities, trade over the counter, test question, negotiated, quote-driven market. Now we have two other government-sponsored enterprises. We have Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And how are they different? Well, they're not directly backed. There's an implied backing. Sometimes we can know too much for our own good. Sometimes you have an advantage as a tabula rasa, a blank slate. But we assume that if Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac got into financial difficulties and they asked the U.S. Treasury for assistance, the answer would be yes. But that isn't the same as a full faith and credit of the United States government. No. That's not a direct backing. No. Now, during the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae did get into financial difficulty. They did ask the U.S. Treasury for assistance, and the answer was yes. So could have been no, though. Could have been no. They pay interest and principal semi-annually. So you're still getting your interest and principal, but not monthly. As we said, Ginnie Mae is the only one that does so monthly. All right, let's look at some practice questions. I pulled this from the SIE practice exam version 4, which can be found on the FINRA website. I love that practice exam. If you're an SIE candidate, you should definitely take that. I would take it maybe more than once. I've actually explicated that exam. Explication means I've gone through each of the questions on the exam, and more than tell you what the right answer is, tell you why and tell you what other questions might have been the right answer for different questions. Go through the answer set, and I highly recommend that to you. But anyways, let's look at this question. Which of the following is true about all U.S. government agencies? They are exempt from federal taxes. Well, we just told you that isn't true. We just told you that Ginnie Maes are fully taxable. So that's false. What I like to do is go through the answer set and put a T or F next to them. They are exempt from registration under 33. That is indeed true. They are issued in bearer form. That is false. There are no securities any longer in the U.S. market that are bearer form. Bearer form means if you're in physical possession, you're presumed to be the owner. And that's not true. Treasury securities and agency securities are typically book entry, meaning they're not bearer form and there is no certificate. They just have you on the books. They send you the appropriate checks at the appropriate times. So, stocks, there is a stock certificate. You want one, but they're not issued in bearer form. They are general obligations of the federal government. No, that's not true either, right? We said that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are not general obligations of the federal government. So the answer is B. Here's another one I pulled. From that practice exam. Which of the following investments are generally traded according to their average life rather than stated maturity? Well, bonds. I don't even know what this is. You should be answering things you don't know what they are. If that was something that's testable, I have no idea what fixed rate capital security is. I don't know your preferred stock. Boom. By the way, don't take answers you don't know what they are. I get frustrated with students sometimes. How do we never talked about it? It wasn't in the book, so I picked it. I came up with this question. I like this question. I would definitely know which of the following have a full faith and credit of the United States government accept. Very much something I'd be prepared for. Direct obligation to the U.S. Treasury, indeed. T-bills, T-notes, T-bonds, yes. Ginnie Mae's, yes. Public Housing Authority bonds and National Housing Authority bonds, yes. No, remember Fannie Mae's, we said, have an implied backing, which of the following pay interest and principal monthly? Right, we said that's a potential test question, and so I wrote you a practice question based on that. All right, well, kind of boring again that, if we go back here, here's my friend Andrew and I. And, here's Andrew. He's the guy who requested the lecture. And here's Dean, as you recall. There were no priority provisions. Boring. Everybody's treated equally. We have two legends in structured finance, Louis Ranieri and Michael Van Roos. And Louis Ranieri and Michael Van Roos in structured finance, living legends, went to Ginnie Mae and saying, listen, I don't want to buy proportion ownership in the mortgage pool. No. I want to buy the whole pool, every mortgage in the pool. Wow. Investment bankers in structured finance have learned you make more selling things by the slice than selling it whole. They've also learned if you give something a fancy French name, you can charge more for it. I'm not going to get much for snails with butter, but escargot and beurre, now we're talking. I have a chef friend, Spencer. I said, Spencer, what's the difference between your cassoulet you're offering me tonight and a casserole? It's about $5. Now, the French word for slice is tranche. If you go into a pizza shop and say, I want a tranche of pizza, that just means you want a slice. And what they're going to do in structured finance is carve this into a bunch of cascading cash flows. This is a little more fun. And these cascading cash flows. Before we did this, remember, it was boring that both, Andrew and I had the same thing. Let's say Andrew buys this first cascading cash flow. And let's say Dean buys this last cascading cash flow. That's a little more fun. Now there are priority provisions about who gets paid first, right? And who gets paid last. So before we carve this up, because that's what collateralized mortgage obligations are, pools of mortgage, Ginnie Mae mortgages that have been carved up. We still don't have any credit risk because we're carving up a pool of Ginnie Mae mortgages. But do we have an indeterminate maturity? Yes, we still do. We still have an indeterminate maturity. Do we have more predictability or less predictability? Now, if you want to sound smart, you should say it depends. That's the whole point of carving it up. Some people are going to have more predictability and some people are going to have less predictability. That's the whole point of carving up this pool. Do you have interest rate risk? Yes. Do you have more or less interest rate risk? Again, to sound smart, you should say it depends. Some people have more, some people have less. That's the whole point of carving it up. Now, these earlier tranches, let me get out my annotation tool, are designed to have, or are structured, that's the key word, structured finance. They are structured to have a more predictable cash flow. That's the whole point of it. And we call these early ones, we call them plan amortization classes. And that's what my friend Andrew has. And so he's going to have a more stable cash flow. He's going to have a less risk is the point. And that is the test issue about PACs. PACs have less risk. And I own, as you see Dean down here, I own a targeted amortization class. And my cash flow is going to be a little less stable, right? That's the whole point of carving it up, right? Some people have more, some people have less. My elevator speech was, I originate, allocate, and manage capital. Men and women in structured finance, I've seen them interview, they say, we allocate risk. You tell us what kind of risk you want, we'll tell you what kind of tranche we can create for you. I saw Michael Vander was being interviewed. He said, I covered a mortgage pool into 186 tranches. Everybody thinks they got the best tranche. Well, that's why it's on the test. Who do you think ends up with the least attractive tranche? Institutional investors capable of protecting their own assets, or Joe Sixpack retail investors? The retail investors, and that's why now it's testable. I would tell you, ladies and gentlemen, anytime structured finance means you're helped to sell a product, that's kind of a red flag. But target amortization classes, also known as tax, have more risk. Now a lot of the providers, I've seen their study materials, and oh my goodness, they just go overkill on this stuff. About companion tranches is how we stabilize the packs and inverse floaters, and oh my goodness, just overkill. If Dean really wanted to take a speculation, I could buy, for example, the Z tranche. I'll put it over here. Let me clean that up. I'm saying I don't want to be paid until all the other cascading cash flows are full. So, I'm over here in that Z tranche. And that would be a very speculative investment on my part, right? If I buy it for 50 and everybody refinances in the year, it's 100, I double my money in a year. However, if people hold that mortgage for 30 years, I'll eventually get that other 50 cents of my dollar back. But, over 30 years, not such a great return. That is actually, a much more speculative investment. So, some people now are taking less risk and some people are taking more risk in terms of how this plays out. And then very testimonial that the buyer has to sign a suitability statement. That's where Andrew tells me that he understands that he's not buying proportionate ownership in a mortgage pool. No, he's buying a cash flow from a mortgage pool. He's buying a derivative security. That is a much different thing. And so that would be something I would know as well. As you see here, Andrew has more priority in getting paid in terms of cascading cash flows than Dean does. And that was the whole point of carving this thing up. Now, once structured finance men and women carve up mortgages, Ginnie Mae pools of mortgages, they say, well, why not carve up cash flows from other things? And so CDOs, collateral debt obligations, are other types of things that have been carved up very much to what we just discussed here. For example, let me show you one I made for you to give you an example. Here's some collateralized debt obligations for a pool of car loans. We still have credit risk because, people could not make their car payment. We have to repo the car. It's less likely that we're going to have to repo the cars like 1 year in, right? So, what you're buying again is these cascading cash flows as people make their payments. And again, the earlier cash flows are going to have less risk than the later cash flows. So we can carve up car loans, credit card receivables, bonds, tranches from other CMOs, whatever the case may be. So CDO is the same idea. It's just we're carving up, turning into various cash flows, other things. These are still derivative securities, right? Because you don't own a proportion ownership in a pool of car loans. No, you own a cash flow from a pool of car loans. That's a different thing. And again, you're going to have priority if you have the A, and less priority if you're down there at the end. I like this beautiful slide. They say a waterfall. Let me get a different color here. I said cascading cash flows, but I like this. So CDRs are structured financial instrument that purchase financial assets such as credit card receivables, mortgage-backed securities, whatever the case may be. The CDO manager and securities firm select and purchase assets. It could be tranches of other CMOs. It could be residential mortgage-backed securities. It can be car loans, credit card receivables. It could be bonds. And then we say, you're going to have if you have first dibs on the money, that's typically have better credit quality, less risk than if you have last claim on the cash flows. I just thought it was a pretty slide, so I put it there for you. All right, let's try some practice questions. Which CMO, which collateralized mortgage obligation tranche has the most stable cash flow? Now, what we want to know is that PACs have less risk and TACs have more risk. Don't ever take warm, fuzzy things like, can't figure it out, right? It depends on market conditions, those are not usually good answers. Which CMO is the most speculative, right? That's where I said, listen, I want to go last in line. I'll take a flyer on this thing. And if I'm right and interest rates go down and all those cascading waterfall cash flows happen quickly, I'm going to make a lot of money. If I'm wrong, I'm not going to get anything. I'm going to be sitting out there waiting on my principal to return to me for a long time. And so that's Z tranche. Don't think you'll see a Z tranche, but I threw it in here for fun. Because I told you, I think most of the study materials I've seen go total overboard on the discussion of collateralized mortgage obligations. And I think it does you a disservice by doing so, because it's kind of like margin. You read all that stuff and you think, well, gee, it wouldn't be here unless it was a big deal. And it's not. It's not a big deal. Which of the following requires a signed customer suitability statement? That is very testable. Remember, what we're asking you to sign is that you understand that you are buying a cash flow from a pool of mortgages rather than buying proportion ownership in the mortgage pool. Those are entirely different things. That's why you're on their it's on the test, because retail investors were confused. They think, oh, Ginnie Mae, that inspires their confidence, but they don't understand it's not Ginnie Mae. And then it says something like PSA, that's the Public Securities Association rating, and it says 8.5. You might think that's an 8.5% Ginnie Mae. That is not what that is. So you can see why people get tested on that. All right. Well, I hope you found that helpful. Like I say, what we'll do is when people request lectures, I like these little lectures. They're a little smaller, a little more condensed about the subject areas on the test. If you have an idea for one, please just let me know, and I'm more than happy to put it in the publishing schedule and put it out there for you. So we'll put this up on the channel, and it'll be there for both Series 7s, SIEs, 65s. And at some point, I call these kind of plugging the gaps or plugging the holes in the lectures on the channel. If people keep requesting like taxation, GinnieMaes and CMOs, types of customer accounts, eventually we'll have everything up there. A little north of where we're at right now. Anyways, study hard. I know you guys are working, you're dedicated, you're disciplined, you're organized in your study effort. Let me know how I can help, and I'm more than happy to do so. Bye-bye.